As their Congresswoman, she is bringing those stories to Washington to help shape federal policy and improve the lives of workers, farmers, seniors, veterans, students, and families in Iowa. An Iowa native, Ashley is an award-winning journalist and a proud wife and mother of two. Ashley previously served in the Iowa State House and represented Iowa's 67th House District, serving Hiawatha, Robbins, Cedar Rapids, and Marion, where she currently resides. As a state representative, she worked successfully to balance the budget, cut taxes, and protect the most vulnerable in her community. In Congress, she continues to be a common sense leader and pursue pro-growth policies. She has introduced and supported bipartisan legislation to improve child care access for working families in Iowa, root out corruption in Washington through federal lobbying bans, and create opportunities for workers in the community. She is a member of the House Appropriations Committee and House Budget Committee, where she oversees the government funding process and fights to ensure every taxpayer dollar is accounted for and spent responsibly. As a mother of two, she also has a keen interest in protecting the safety and security of Iowa families. Additionally, Ashley recognizes the critical role community colleges play in changing lives and building our workforce. Prior to serving in Iowa's in public office, Ashley was an anchor for KCRG TV in Cedar Rapids. For more than a decade, she had the opportunity to connect with Iowa's small business owners and community leaders. Ashley's extensive reporting on rising healthcare costs, devastating flooding, and other critical issues impacting eastern Iowa drove her to seek opportunities to better serve her community and take action to solve the problems she had covered for years. While working at KCRG, Ashley earned recognition as a two-time Midwest Regional Emmy Award winner, an RTDNA Health Reporting Fellow, and a Waypoint Tribute to Women honoree. She received her BA in Broadcast Journalism from the University of Southern California before returning home to Iowa to work and raise a family. Ashley and her husband Matt are raising their two sons in Marion. Her children motivate her every day to fight for a better community and a stronger economy for all Iowa families. Ashley's also an active member of her community, regularly playing violin at Antioch Christian Church and volunteering with local charities. I'd like to personally thank Ashley for being with us today, and in particular for her unwavering support of Hawkeye Community College and Iowa's community colleges. Please join me in welcoming Congresswoman Ashley Hinson.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for taking a little time out of your day to come out and have a great community conversation. And Jay, thank you for the kind introduction. I don't think we've talked about this before. My husband actually did take some classes here at Hawkeye, so Hawkeye is very near and dear to our family, as I'm sure to many of you in the audience. So again, thank you for coming out in person. It's important that I hear directly from you on the issues that matter to you, so that I can take those stories back to Washington, D.C. And be an effective voice for you and for other Iowans there. This is my 16th in-person town hall meeting. I've also done a number of virtual town halls and Facebook Live town halls, so I can be accessible to Iowans, whether I'm in Washington, D.C. or here at home in the district. And last year we went to every county in the district at least 4 times. It's important for me to get out and, as I said, hear those stories so I can go back and be an effective advocate for you and advocate for policies that are good for the district and that will improve your everyday lives. I run against the chaos and dysfunction in Washington, D.C., and I'm sure many of you follow the headlines and know it is palpable there. But I think we can cut through a lot of that and continue to be a good advocate for Iowa's working families. We need to make sure that every Iowa family feels safe in their neighborhood. We need to make sure that our rural communities, which drive a lot of our economy here in Iowa, have a strong voice and get the attention that they deserve out in Washington. And I can't do any of that without the stories that you bring to me, so that's again why I'm here today, to take that feedback with me. It's directly informed a lot of the bills that I have introduced on your behalf in Washington, D.C. And I think we can all agree that too often the conversations there do not reflect the conversations that are happening here around our kitchen tables. So again, for me, it's about doing what's best for our communities in the district. That means supporting policies that are going to move us in the right direction, but it also means pushing back on policies that I see as doing more harm than good, weighing all of those things as I'm being your voice and looking for opportunities, obviously, to work across the aisle when possible. That's really critical, and I'll be talking about some of the bipartisan legislation that we've been successful in shepherding across the finish line. But right now, our priorities are pretty simple. I went to Washington to stand up for taxpayers, for rural America, and for safety and security. So we have to focus on getting our economy back up and running again coming out of this pandemic. We need to secure our border. We have an absolute crisis at our border that is not getting any better. It's compounding every single month, and I'll be talking about that today as well. We also need to continue to focus on policies that will protect our freedoms and ensure that every Iowan has access to freedom and opportunity. Right now, it's very clear to me, and I think probably the number one issue I hear about from folks at these town halls and communications to our office, the Biden and Pelosi agenda for our country right now is not working for American families. The spending is out of control in Washington, D.C. right now. We are dealing with record high prices as a result of that spending spree. There was a multi-trillion-dollar spending spree last year, and we were sounding the alarm on a lot of this spending, saying it would contribute to a lot of the negative economic impacts your families are feeling right now, and they didn't listen. I think it's important to highlight some of the most wasteful uses of your money in the last year, because it's your money, it's not the government's money. A few of the items that your taxpayer dollars funded as part of those spending blowout packages last year, over $700 million went to prisoners. People like the Boston Marathon bomber, people like Dylan Roof, who went into a church in Charleston, South Carolina, and killed people worshiping. Those people got checks from behind bars, your money. $250 billion went to bailouts to states that have chronically mismanaged their budgets, states like New York and California, where their legislatures are not responsible with taxpayer money. They've dug themselves into a hole, and they expected the federal government to dig them out. In my mind, when you have a legislature here in Iowa that is being responsible, is living within its means, and is being respectful, they are taking your money to bail out those other states who can't manage their budgets. So again, I mentioned my colleagues and I, my Republican colleagues and I, started sounding the alarm on the out-of-control spending and the negative impacts it would have. We said it would result in higher prices on everyday goods, and it has. I think we're all seeing that, whether it's at the grocery store or on Main Street. We are feeling the pinch of the Pelosi agenda from Congress. With inflation spiking more than 7% in the last year, we know that those prices haven't increased that much since 40 years ago. It's the highest rate we've seen since before I was born. For a little bit of perspective on that, it was the year E.T. was in the movie theaters. Time magazine named the computer its person of the year, and Sony was introducing its first CD player. So it's been a long time since we've seen out of control inflation like this, and it's a direct result of the policies coming out of Washington, D.C. So from increased costs at the grocery store, what you're paying at the pump, utility bills, Iowans are paying the price literally for Speaker Pelosi and President Biden's multi-trillion-dollar spending binge, and working families can't keep up. Working families are calling our office. They're sending pictures of their utility bills directly to us, showing that $150 increase year over year in their utility bill. That's just one area of their budget that they're having to feel that pinch. Over the past year, the cost of bacon has gone up 18%, the cost of pork up 15%, the cost of peanut butter up 16%, the cost of chicken up 10%. I was just at a retailer yesterday, a small Main Street retailer in Delhi. Their average price of a case of chicken wings went up $19 per case. The cost of eggs is up 13%. These are not fancy items. These are everyday staples that our families rely on here in Iowa. We also know that inflation has hit the energy sector hard. I mentioned the people taking pictures of their utility bills and sending them to us. Mid-American had warned, obviously, that due to the challenges they were facing, and the direct result of these policies that we've seen come out of Washington in terms of energy, that they would see bills increase anywhere from 50 to 94%, I believe was the number they gave. We're in the middle of an energy affordability crisis, and we're feeling that at the pump as well. In just the last month, gas prices have spiked 20 cents, And from where we were a year ago, they're up $1 a gallon over a year ago. So it's very clear that this is a huge issue, that the leadership in Washington, D.C. right now, in terms of Speaker Pelosi, President Biden, and Senator Schumer, are turning a blind eye to these actual problems facing Americans. I know that inflation is not just a number increase. It's because we are hearing those stories come into our office. It's the stories of the mom who's spending less at the grocery store because she's trying to fill up her gas tank halfway and she's making that decision. It's the small business waiting for a backlog of supply chain issues while trying to get people to come to work and keep the lights on, or someone living on a fixed income who is trying to figure out how they're just gonna make it all fit into their budget. So we've heard those stories loud and clear, and those are the stories that I am telling on your behalf in Washington, D.C. As Democrats in Congress continue to push for spending beyond our means. It's irresponsible and it's reckless and it's disrespectful to taxpayers right now. Speaker Pelosi has renewed calls to continue to try to pass a multi-trillion-dollar spending package, the BBB. The White House is planning on asking Congress for additional spending for COVID relief. We should be accounting for the billions of dollars that's already been spent that's unaccounted for. We know there was a lot of fraud, waste, and abuse with many of these spending packages that went out, and we should be asking questions and getting full accountability for that money before we spend anything else, because again, I remind my colleagues on a regular basis, it's not the government's money, it's your money. So bottom line, everyday life for all of us is less affordable under this spending spree, and the only way we turn it off is to rein in the spending. I wanna make sure that your paycheck goes further every month. We know that these policies have taken our country backwards. We know it resulted in a real cut to actual take-home pay for workers in the last year because the inflation rate far exceeded the labor wage growth rate. So again, we need to turn off the spending spigot and really start respecting taxpayers. So I wanted to go to Washington, D.C. to obviously stand up for those priorities, making sure we're watching over your taxpayer dollars like a hawk, and I'm a fiscal hawk on the appropriations and the budget committees. But I also wanted to address a number of different policy areas and make a positive impact. Again, I will always put what's just right for our district first, because I think it's important that we have that voice. We have someone who's willing to question whether these one-size-fits-all policies coming out of Washington are right for you. So I've introduced 19 bills to help solve the problems that you are facing, and many of these, as I mentioned, are direct results of my 20 county tour visits throughout the district and the feedback that I've gotten at these town halls. So one that I hope we can get across the finish line, but I think it really is based on that feedback we've been getting from a lot of working families, is the Child Care Act. It would focus on improving access to child care for working families by addressing the regulatory side. The Defend the Blend Act is a bipartisan bill that I introduced. I'm not sure how many, but we've got probably, right approaching 20 bipartisan co-sponsors on that bill, which would tell the EPA that they cannot go in and retroactively change the requirements that we have in place for biofuel blending here in the state. And that would give our family farmers and our biofuel industry more certainty long-term. The Protecting Financial Privacy Act is designed to help stop the IRS from snooping in your personal bank accounts. We heard many proposals last year to supercharge the IRS, to give them billions of dollars to come after you and to get into your bank accounts on a granular level. And I think that's fundamentally wrong. So I introduced that the Protecting Financial Privacy Act to stop the IRS from snooping in your bank accounts. The Red Tape Reduction Act would make the most impactful deregulatory executive orders from the previous administration permanent, get the government out of the way to try to get our economy back on the right track. And most recently, I introduced the Stop the Betrayal Act, because we learned that the Biden administration was flying illegal immigrants into our communities in the dead of night. It took leaked video and leaked audio. They haven't been accountable. We've been asking them questions about this for months, specific to the border and specific to the crisis at the border, and they have not been transparent. So this bill is a direct result of that and what I've been hearing from Iowans. We should not be spending your taxpayer money to fly illegal immigrants into our country, which is what has been happening. It's about $300 million, and I can think of a lot better uses of that money right now for the people of this country. So while I'll continue to push back against policies that I think take us in the wrong direction, I do want to find common ground where possible to continue to deliver on Iowa's priorities, and my legislative record reflects that. As I mentioned, I've co-sponsored and worked on several bipartisan pieces of legislation that I think are very impactful for this district and will help a lot of people. One that I wanted to highlight today is specific to veterans, because we know not all war wounds are visible. PTSD affects many of the people who fought and served our country. So the Sergeant Ketchum Rural Veterans Mental Health Act is now law. I'm very proud of that. I was the lead Republican sponsor. Congresswoman Cindy Axne, Democrat from Des Moines, was the lead Democrat sponsor on the bill. And we were both in President Biden's office when he signed it into law last year. This piece of legislation is named for Sergeant Brandon Ketchum, who served our country valiantly overseas, 2 tours of duty, Iraq and Afghanistan, and came home and suffered PTSD. And he went to seek help for mental health services at the VA and was turned away. And later that same day, he took his own life. And I never want another mother to have to experience that, have to deal with that phone call, or another family to have to deal with the struggles that PTSD have on their family. So very proud of that piece of legislation, which will help the VA to better triage mental health access and mental health care for veterans, no matter what their zip code is. We want to make sure that veterans have access to that care. So some things do transcend politics. I think caring for our nation's veterans is one of those things. And I'm really proud to have worked to get that bill across the finish line on behalf of our nation's veterans. I also wanted to take a couple of minutes to talk about disasters and being prepared for them. Because as we all know here in Iowa, we are no stranger to natural disasters, whether that's a derecho or a dangerous flood. And I've obviously been out on the ground and experienced both and covered both. We can't control the weather, but we can control how prepared we are for what comes next. So we need to be making sure that we're forward thinking about flood mitigation, about proactive disaster response, the right investments needed to make sure not only our family homes are protected, but our businesses are, our farmers have the resources to recover and build long-term resilience to our natural disasters, and also that our towns, our communities have the ability to make informed decisions about where to build critical resources, things like hospitals and fire stations. So being out on the ground, obviously in the days following the derecho, continuing to hear from Iowans grappling with that damage still. We know that people are still waiting for repairs to happen. It's really influenced a lot of how I view my role and work in Congress for you. A top priority for me to ensure that our community, our farmers, our families, our small businesses are as prepared as possible for a natural disaster. So I've been working across the aisle on this issue. We've made some progress. I serve on, as I mentioned, the Appropriations Committee. We oversee FEMA on the Homeland Security Appropriations Committee. So we're working not only to make sure we have updated flood maps and risk analysis in place, but also we're working on improving the FEMA process. We heard directly into our office. We were working with constituents on their claims. That process has some snags in it, to put it mildly. So we need to improve FEMA's disaster response, and specifically when it comes to applications for that aid, we're working to streamline that process for constituents. This will continue to be a top priority for me because ultimately this affects not just here in Iowa, but many districts in our country. I've hosted several bipartisan briefings on Risk Rating 2.0, which is the new flood insurance rating system. We've had offices from Florida, Texas, all over the country join bipartisan members who also want to work with us and make sure we can be resilient long term. But again, if there's one thing that I want you to remember from today, and I've highlighted obviously some of my work here, but our work is really cut out for us because the administration is taking us in the wrong direction with their spending spree. Life is less affordable under this administration's tax and spend agenda. We've seen the new tax proposals as part of the BBB. It will continue to be less affordable, and you'll get to keep less of your paycheck if we continue on this path. They are trying to expand the role of government in our everyday lives. Increasing the size of the IRS is just one example of that. And we shouldn't be funding these far left policies and these invasive growth of government policies right now when we have so many other issues to be tackling. And what I hear from Iowans is that they want to live their lives, get the government out of the way so they can have the ability to run their small businesses, live their lives without the government there. But again, big spending, big government policies that we're seeing right now out of Washington, D.C. are making life less affordable for all of us. We are in the business of customer service in our office, and before we get to questions today, which is the reason why I'm here, I just wanted to quickly walk you through some of the services that we provide in the district. We have 3 district offices, one right here in Waterloo. We also have one in Dubuque, and we have one in Cedar Rapids. We deal a lot with the IRS. Actually, probably the #1 casework area where we do work is in helping solve challenges people are facing with the IRS. So whether that's a tax return that you haven't gotten in a timely fashion, or issues dealing with EIDL loans or SBA, those are all issues that we've worked through in the last year. Visa and passport issues, as well as, again, as I mentioned, dealing with FEMA, Social Security, veterans benefits. So those are all areas where our office can be of assistance to you. If you have any questions or concerns, please don't hesitate to give us a call. My staff is in the room today. If you're a member of my staff, will you raise your hand? We're gonna make sure you see everybody, so if you have questions after we're done here today, follow up with them, and Christina is in our Waterloo office to serve you as well. So let's go ahead and get to questions today, and I'm not gonna screen questions. I'm gonna call on everybody that we can get to in the time that we're here. I just ask that as Andy goes around with the mic, just say your name and where you're from, so we can make sure we're following up. And again, I hope we can all be respectful and just have a really good conversation here today, but I'm here to hear from you and to answer your questions. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started, and right here in the front row. Go ahead.
My name is Alice Schafel from Dyer, and farmers can sequester carbon by no-till, and we've got about 10 or 20 companies out there that are trying to pay us for carbon, but they have no guidelines or no standards to set what they are. Each one uses a different way, and most of the time they just pay for changing practices, and none of them know exactly what they're doing. I would like to have you ask Senator Vilsack, who said at the Iowa Farm Bureau, the American Farm Bureau, that the government was not going to set any standards. I would like to have you ask him if he wouldn't set some standard so these companies that are coming to us to buy these carbon would have all be working under the same standards. The way they are now, they're so mixed up, we don't know one from another, how to compare them. It really needs to have the government come in and say, this is what you're paying for when you buy it from a farmer.
You're talking about the carbon credits?
Yes.
Yeah, those situations. Okay. Yeah, and I think I'm happy to follow up with Secretary Vilsack, and obviously he knows Iowa well, and we have a good working relationship with him. I'm happy to follow up on that priority specifically. I know that there have been a lot of discussions about carbon fee and dividends, carbon sequestration and pipelines, and all of those things are conversations that are percolating right now in the district. But I think it's important that we absolutely protect our environment for future generations. And I know you as a farmer, obviously, and a member of the Farm Bureau, you care about your land, and you want to be a good steward of your land, and you want to do this the right way. And so I applaud you for coming out today and bringing that up. I think we can approach this from a number of different ways. And just let me highlight a couple of the things we've done in our office from a policy perspective to help address some of these issues. Innovation in the ag community is huge. We've seen huge developments with precision ag technology. So I introduced the Precise Act, which would help make sure that we can, more farmers can access precision agriculture equipment to be better stewards of their inputs. And obviously the goal is to put less in and get more out, and I know you understand that. And I think should be a priority for us, just as we're looking to encourage innovation in the agriculture industry. Specifically, I think conservation practices and all of those work very well too, and we need to try to incentivize those. One that I specifically worked on recently with Congresswoman Sherry Bustos from Illinois, right across the river. We introduced the Dalsey Act, which is specific to the driftless area, but it allows for a grant program to be utilized that was in place for 5 years to help with conservation as well. So I think all of these are part of the bigger discussion about how we can be better stewards of our land, how we can continue to work on ways to protect our environment, and I think a combination of these things will work very well. And I'm excited that farmers have a seat at the table, and that's my ultimate priority, is making sure that it's not a one-sided conversation, that everybody can engage. So Al will follow up, make sure you get your information with my staff, and we'll make sure we follow up on that conversation as well. Thank you. Right behind.
Yes, Ashley, I'd like to talk about election integrity. First of all, I want to commend you for joining the Election Integrity Caucus that is led by Representative Tenney and Representative Garcia. I think there's over 50 members now that are a member of that caucus. Secondly, I want to thank you for voting against H.R. 1 and H.R. 4, would have overridden many of Iowa's election laws and the safeguards we put in place. The state and the county commissioners are charged with maintaining the voter registration rolls, removing dead voters, people who have moved to another state and registered there, etc. I think there is something, a role that the federal government could play, and that is they could help to share cross-state information about where voters are registered so that our commissioners can maintain their voter registration rolls better, so that we have people that are voting are people who should be voting. Currently, Iowa is one of some 30 states that belongs to ERIC, the Electronic Registration Information Center, and there are a number of problems with that organization. They have a secret contract with each state that signs up and require certain things that are not necessarily in our state's best interest. So I think the federal government could play a role in comparing cross-state voter registration lists, as well as they have access to other information like the Social Security Death Index, which would help to identify people who have died out of state. So I hope that you can work with your caucus and bring this policy forward.
And you said the acronym was ERIC?
Eric.
Okay. I'll look that up too and make sure I'm informed on that. I don't want to speak to something I don't know about, so I'll definitely look into that and follow up there. And I appreciate you bringing up those two bills, because elections are meant to be executed at the state level, and I firmly believe that. And we've seen a huge government overreach in terms of those election policies that you mentioned with H.R. 1 and H.R. 4. Our state has common sense voter protections in place because we want to make it easy to vote and hard to cheat, and I think that should be our ultimate goal across the board, but integrity is at the center of all of that. That's why I think things like voter ID are really important, and we know that you want to make sure that your vote is your vote, and we want to verify that your vote is your vote, and so that provision is in place, and unfortunately with those policies, H.R. 1 and H.R. 4, it would enable those to go away. And it would not only do that, but it would also require the DOJ to approve any election policy that's passed here by our Iowa legislators. You talk about the people closest to the people, your state legislators are out there in our small districts here in Iowa. I've been there myself, and I've worked on a lot of these election policies, and they knew that members of Congress would try, our founding fathers knew it, they knew that they would try to grab more power for themselves in Washington, D.C., and that's exactly what H.R. 1 and H.R. 4 do. So again, I think we need to stay away from this government overreach. That's why I didn't support those bills. We need to focus on integrity. I'm with you on the voter rolls. We need to make sure that law is being followed, because ultimately I think, and I'll have a follow-up conversation with Secretary Pate as well about that. I know that they've been engaging with other states to make sure that they are verifying here in Iowa. Not every state is doing that, and I think California is a great example. I've talked to many of my colleagues, so you mentioned Mr. Garcia in that caucus. We've had conversations specifically about this because it's taken years for them to even move forward on policies in existing law that are in place designed to do exactly what you're talking about. So we need to focus on the common sense election integrity policies that work, that make it so that you know your voice is your vote and that it's easy to vote and hard to cheat. So thank you very much. Yeah, let's go back there. How about in the middle? Which one? Black shirt, sorry.
I hope I can ask two questions. I had one, but your
Can you
comment.
speak up a little bit?
Yeah, I hope I can ask you two questions. I had one picked out, but your comments on the veterans kind of got me because in a recent newsletter you said you would stop fighting, not stop fighting to make sure veterans got the care they deserve. Yet the same week you wrote that you voted against two bills that have helped veterans. One would be awarding time for active duty toward GI Bill benefits, and the other is to automatically enroll eligible veterans in VA healthcare after they separate from the military. Why did you vote against making sure veterans are enrolled in VA healthcare?
Well, thank you for that question, and I'm happy to answer. One of the things I think you're referring to is the eVest Act, and then the other one specifically, I can't remember the title of it, but I know the policy that you're talking about. Unfortunately, those bills did not go through, they didn't get a proper process in terms of hearing from the VA about the potential impacts. They were brought to the floor before we knew those. That's a huge problem, because ultimately, when we're looking at a system that's already strained, and already is facing many challenges, we need to make sure we're being efficient and moving in that direction first before we massively expand. So that was the reason why I didn't support those bills specifically, because they could have actually been a disservice to veterans in the long run, and I don't think that's responsible.
Can I just ask one other one, please?
And then, yeah, I'm happy to answer your second question.
You talk a lot about inflation and the impact it has on Iowa families.
One second, let him bring the mic over
Okay,
so we can all hear. Thank you.
You talk a lot about inflation and the impact it has on Iowa families. You recently stated your support for the bipartisan informed lawmaking to combat inflation act, which is really just a procedural bill to analyze legislation. If you want to combat inflation, will you hold greedy corporations accountable and vote yes on HR 675, the COVID-19 Price Gouging Prevention Act, which would bolster the Federal Trade Commission and states' attorneys generals in protecting consumers across the country from pandemic profiteering?
I'll take a look at HR 675 and absolutely will follow up with you after I've had a chance to review that. One thing I want to speak to specifically about the bill that you brought up, because I did introduce that. That's a bipartisan bill. I've worked with, I think it's Congressman Katko from New York, Congresswoman Stephanie Murphy from Florida, and then Kirk Schrader from Oregon. So Republicans and Democrats, very, very different districts all over the country. But it's reflective of the fact that the process in Congress about how we bring a lot of these bills to the floor is irresponsible. I mentioned my votes on those policies that could negatively impact veterans' care. The same thing goes with the policies that are coming out. If we're not voting on a bill with a CBO score, that's irresponsible and it's disrespectful to taxpayers. The bare minimum of what we should be doing as we're making these huge decisions on spending bills is knowing what they do. So that is the intent behind that bill specifically, is to make sure that we as members of Congress get that CBO score on the impact of inflation before we're voting on a bill. There were several massive pieces of legislation that they continued to bring to the floor last year with multi-trillion-dollar price tags and no consideration for what that impact would be. I had a chance to, as a member of the Appropriations and Budget Committees, and I just was on a budget hearing in between my town halls today. We had a chance to ask questions of the Acting Director of Office of Management and Budget last year. And specifically, I asked her, have you accounted for inflation in any of your budgetary projections? And she told me no. So that's where the root of this is. It's irresponsible for Congress to continue down this path, this spending spigot, spending spree. It's disruptive and it's disrespectful to taxpayers, and ultimately, long-term, it will do a ton of damage to our country that I'm afraid we won't be able to get out of. So we need to be serious about it. That's why I've got a bipartisan bill to do that. And you can count on me to continue to go out there and make sure we're being transparent about the legislation that we're voting on in Washington. Right in the middle.
Thank you. Ashley, okay. Can I hold it? No, I can't hold it. I'm Ted Lederman, and I appreciate all the work you've done. A couple of weeks ago, President Biden said the reason why we have high energy prices is the greedy oil companies. There is no one more greedy in this country, no one who spends more money than the federal government. The greed is there. They close the pipeline, they close drilling, and then they say the companies are greedy. The other thing is, our federal agencies are unresponsible to the citizens of the United States. The IRS has not seen people, they have not seen individual taxpayers with their complaints. You can call them up, you'll hang on for 20, 30 minutes, and they automatically hang up. We have, I'm a retired doctor, they have a paperwork reduction act. Okay, so that is, for doctors to prescribe diabetic supplies like needles, insulin, test strips, or aerosols, bronchodilators for asthmatics. I was in practice for 38 years. Then you have to go to the federal government for their Paperwork Reduction Act to be able to prescribe the same thing that you were taught in medical school, in your internship, in your residency, and you did for 35 years. Then, if you have trouble, which I did, doing the paperwork on the computer, you call up the helpline. So what does the helpline do? You wait 90 minutes and they hang up. They never answer. No company, no business could deal with people, consumers, the way that this government does. It's pathetic.
Thank you.
It needs to be cleaned from the top to the bottom.
Thank you, Dr. Lehman, for coming out today, and I appreciate your comments there. Let me just address a few of the things that you said. First, on energy. I agree with you. We should be focused on domestic production, and one of the quickest ways to provide relief at the pump is to allow for domestic production. This administration on day one took us in a different direction. Not only have they closed down pipelines, you mentioned the leasing and the drilling on our own federal leases. It's a huge concern when the solution to that President Biden is offering is, let's go to our foreign producers for more. That's not a good solution. Dipping into the strategic reserve, I think happened for political reasons only in the fall, and it didn't really do anything to lower gas prices or address the real problem here. And so I've approached this from we need to look at it from an all of the above perspective. Number one, you shouldn't be dipping into the strategic reserve if you are banning federal leasing and federal drilling. So that's one piece of legislation that I've signed on to. The other is looking to a ready-made solution right here in Iowa. I drive a flex fuel minivan, so I can take up to E85. Last week, E85 was 50 cents cheaper than a gallon of regular gas. E15 is regularly cheaper. So this is an area where I think we could work, we have a biofuels caucus, that's a bipartisan caucus in Congress. Got a lot of good Midwestern people that I can work with there, and we're trying to make sure that they look to our industry as a ready solution to help lower those gas prices at the pump. But it is hugely concerning to me, and obviously we're all paying more for gas right now, as I mentioned, 20 cents week over week. As far as our federal agencies are concerned, I'm with you and I'm ticked too. And let me tell you why. Because when we were hearing from people like you that they were waiting 45 minutes, I actually had my staff call and see how long it would take. After 45 minutes, they hung up too. So it's unfortunate that I can't even imagine. Obviously, when you're calling our office, you're frustrated, you're at your last resort, and it's because these agencies are failing you when you are the one who's paying to keep their lights on and pay their salaries. So they should be back at work. And right now we know the IRS, the Personnel Records Division, our veterans can't get their benefits. There's a huge backlog there. They're only operating at 25% capacity right now. Last year, I wrote a letter and was successful in getting them to bump it up to 50% here in Iowa for the Farm Service Agency offices, because they were only operating at 25%. But this is a huge concern. So I have written a letter to the Biden administration telling them it's time for our government agencies to get back to work, back at full staff. This is really impacting people's lives. And I have a 91-year-old constituent in Manchester whose husband died, and she's eligible for his VA benefits, and she can't get them because they won't go and pull the records, which they still have to do by hand. So that's a real-world impact of these policies. We need to get our federal agencies back to work. I'm 100% in agreement with that. So thank you. Okay. Let's go over here, and then back.
First, I want to congratulate you on your impressive fundraising numbers. When I was looking at them, I noticed that James and Marta Mossian from Boca Raton gave the maximum amount to your campaign. And I should say, I've spent a portion of my winters in Florida, and it's my opinion that they're financial geniuses when it comes to real estate development and really pillars of their community. And the fact that they happen to be Armenian, I think is quite interesting. Because I'm quite a fan of Armenian history. So I was wondering, could you perhaps elaborate on your relationship with them? I would be very pleased if they would invest in Iowa or something of that sort.
I don't know them personally, so
Okay.
I think a lot of people, and I can't talk about campaign issues today because this is an official stop.
Okay.
So happy to follow up with you offline about that specifically, because I have to be very careful about official duties versus campaign duties, but
Yes,
we'll follow up.
you have my.
Yep, thank you, yes. Let's go right behind, sorry, ma'am, with the blue mask, and then we'll come to her first, and then you, and then go back to her. Thank you.
Yes, I'm wondering, President Biden had said when he was campaigning that he would veto, especially a single-payer universal health care, which would be so important to rural Iowa, which a lot of our educated people leave the state because the small businesses can't afford to pay for the benefits that large businesses already do. This leads to our small hospitals going out of business in small towns, even during a pandemic when the people need the health care close the most. I'm just appalled. I grew up in Fayette County a long time ago. I mean, hey, all 6 of us were born at home. The doctor came to the house in those days. But even as I was getting older, they could go just a few miles to West Union Hospital. Now people have to go so far just to have a baby delivered. And in order to save this, and the pandemic should have been a lesson to everybody that, you know, the contact tracing and trying to nip the virus in the bud, to locate where it is and keep it there so that it didn't spread to everybody and everywhere. There are even people that have got COVID more than once. It shouldn't have been that way. But it's because of such a convoluted, so many people doing it, and several, multiple, economic evaluations have shown that it would overall save money. You know, it should be a conservative value to save overhead. Make it simpler from the beginning. Yes, keep it regulated so that it doesn't get out of hand, so that it's in control. And when people get sick, they shouldn't have to worry about how they're gonna pay the bill. I know a nurse here in Waterloo who was working in the intensive care unit, and the man said that you know, asked her, what is this gonna cost? And she's just shaking her head. No, he says, I've got to know. Well, they brought him some paperwork and he said, pull the plug. This is not, in the richest country in the world, this is not the way it should work. Even the Congressional Budget Office said it would save money. It might make the taxes go up a little, for not much for you know, most of the ordinary working people, but it probably would make a big influence on the people that already have way more than what they need or want or could ever spend in their lifetime. This ought to be a bipartisan issue, just to get single-payer universal health care. But the politicians of both parties that get money from healthcare industry, big people, it kind of maneuver it so that it won't work.
Well, what'd you say your name was again, ma'am? I'm sorry. Ruth?
I forgot to
That's
say
okay.
Cedar Falls.
No, thank you, Ruth, for coming out, and I want to address a couple of things you said specifically, because I think at the heart of what I think we both care about and agree about here is access to care in rural Iowa matters, and cost of care matters, right? So I want to talk a little bit about what we're doing policy-wise to help address both of those things right now. Unfortunately, I think the data that I've seen shows that a Medicare for All approach could actually endanger some of our rural hospitals with the price tag. So happy to follow up with you on that. But I wanted to talk about some bills that I've introduced specifically because rural care is absolutely important. I've just met with our community health centers last week to talk about they want considered long-term access to telehealth, for example, and continued support there. So we continue to work on that and making sure that that's accessible for everyone. I agree, people shouldn't be having to drive hundreds of miles to have a baby, right? And we know that our critical access hospitals in rural Iowa are doing a great job serving people in our communities. I've toured a number of them. I was here at Mercy One in Waterloo a few months ago having a lot of these same conversations. They have, you know, clinics and operations throughout the first district, as well as Gunderson Health, which has a clinic in Decorah, for example. So a lot of these healthcare providers are focused on continuing to provide rural care, and I think that's absolutely critical. So specifically for maternal care, because I think that's absolutely critical, and I've been there myself. I was lucky enough to be able to drive right down the road, 10-minute drive to see my doctor. Specifically here at Mercy One, they have a great midwives program, and looking to expand that program, because oftentimes if we can get a midwife out into a rural area, that's a great access to care point for our expectant mothers. So the Midwives for Moms Act, it's a bipartisan bill that I have co-sponsored, so I encourage you to take a look at that. As well as the Babies Act, which would encourage the use of community development dollars to be able to put up independent birthing centers. So those are two areas where we want to provide that access to care no matter what your zip code is, and that's an area where we have prioritized. We need to continue to find efficiencies in healthcare. I'm 100% with you there, because ultimately the best way we can drive down costs is to be more efficient, and that will impact everyone positively. I think transparency goes along with that. We've got legislation that's passed that would require our hospitals to be more transparent on the pricing and on what they're charging for things. We are awaiting some of that data, and as soon as we get that, I can issue some more comments there. But specifically, we're waiting for them to comply on those legislations, that piece of legislation. But I think that will have a positive impact. Putting a little light on it, I think, will help to drive down prices. And then as far as prescription drugs, which I know many of you in this room are concerned about, specifically the cost of insulin, which we know is impacting so many people. We need to make sure we're encouraging innovation, but again, this is another area where we need to hold the big pharma companies accountable, and they need to be more transparent. So HR 19 is the Lower Costs, More Cures Act, and I support this because it does continue to help support innovation. We've seen what can happen when there's too much restriction on the development of these life-saving drugs and medications, but it also allows for access to alternative treatments, incentivizes that research, increases the drug price transparency, which I think is absolutely critical to making sure we can provide that competition, and then it caps the out-of-pocket costs for insulin for Part D. Also, Part D competition is included in that bill. So again, we need more transparency from our drug companies. They're spending billions of dollars across this country on advertising. What do you think that does to the cost of these drugs? It drives them straight through the roof. So we need answers there. That's a piece of legislation that I've co-sponsored in addition to the Midwives for Moms and the Babies Act as well. So rural healthcare, very important to me, and we'll continue to have those conversations, and we'll follow up with
But
it.
it's related to the brain drain too, and that makes the population of Iowa go down proportionately. We keep losing districts over time.
I think the answer is a combination of things. Healthcare is one of those parts. It's also continuing to provide good paying jobs in rural America. Just yesterday, I was in Delhi visiting a coffee shop and a meat deli. Then I was after that at a foundry in Brandon. These are the kinds of rural jobs that we need to continue to support, and we need to continue to make life easier and those opportunities more available for Iowans so that they can continue to live here.
But an entrepreneur shouldn't have to learn to negotiate healthcare as well as he learns how to run their business. And people who are sick should be able to go in and get care and not have to worry about money, and simplify the process. And it'll
We have a lot of
cost
work to do clearly on
less.
this issue.
It'll
Yes.
cost less. It ought to be bipartisan.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, I'm going to talk a little bit about education. I know that most education funds come from a local level, not from the federal level. But a year ago, right in the midst of the pandemic, I saw a picture of you with a mask on that said, "Trust science, not teachers' unions." And I thought, what a slap in the face. I've been a teacher for over 30 years. It was the teachers' unions that enabled me to raise my 3 kids and put them through college. It was the raises that teachers got through the teachers union. It was also, we got my family health care. My husband didn't have a job that had good health care. So the health care that we got was negotiated through our teachers union. In fact, our teachers, the administration said he wanted everybody to be in the union. It'd be easier to negotiate. I mean, it was a good thing back, and I'm not that old. I've been retired for about 5 years, but in that time, it was just something that was done. And when I saw that you had this trust science, not teachers unions, right in the midst of the pandemic, when it said we've got to open up schools, my son and daughter-in-law were teaching at that time, and their schools were open. And I'm thinking, well, does Ashley not know that schools in Iowa are open? What is this for? And it just seems to me it was for division. Because what you can do in Washington is not education. I mean, you had to make a statement, and the statement had to do with, like every other state, but Iowa. So fast forward to now, your latest statement is about masks. Okay, parents should have the chance, and you just had a statement about masks. I'm still subbing. I sub in the Catholic schools, I sub in the public schools regularly, just about every day. Masks are not the issue. The issue that we are having is that the teachers are leaving the profession. I mean, I don't know who is gonna be the last teacher in Iowa to shut the door, but there will be one, because teachers who have been in the profession for so long are tired of fighting, seeing their representative on TV with masks on, denigrating them, talking, not supporting teachers. I mean, you know what's going on in our state. But what is going on now is, the problem is, there's no subs. They don't have adequate funding to keep teachers in the profession. Teachers are getting attacked from all over, but I don't think it's from most of the people. I think there's a far right, I don't know, but we should not see our representative on TV putting out anti-teacher, anti-education things when it is, I can fight with our state government all I want, but that shouldn't be, you know that. The federal government you don't have a lot of control of the money that goes there. I'll say one more thing, I know I'm rambling, but one of the things that did bother, you said, okay, we have to have a bill that all the schools need to be open, or they don't get money. In Cedar Rapids, the Cedar Rapids schools wouldn't have gotten money because of the trade show. Republicans used to be for local control, but now all of a sudden one size fits all, and one size does not fit all. My question, first my comment is that it was, talk about disrespect, I thought that was very disrespectful. And the things that are coming out about teachers, I think it's just to divide and not unite. Also, what's your plan to keep teachers in the state, to keep schools open, and to keep teachers in the state? Because it's the same thing the lady was talking about, it's a brain drain. Our young people are not going into the teaching profession, and teachers are leaving the state. And they're really leaving the teacher profession in droves now. So, what's your plan? If you're gonna put out things about teachers unions and anti-teacher this, what's your plan to keep teachers in our state?
And what was your name again?
Michelle.
Michelle, thank you. Yes, happy to talk about these issues. The first thing I would say is the plan with that bill that I introduced last year, that I was speaking about that day, was because many students in this country didn't have the option to be in school in person. Just a minute.
I'm sorry.
It's okay.
Why are you worried about other? You're saying we're supposed to be all for Iowa. Why are you worried about those states or whatever, those people? Where are they?
Well, this is a brain drain issue for our entire.
Okay, now let's finish. But it's kind of like, again, schools are a local issue, not a federal issue. And why are you worried about that? I still think it's about division. I think it's a way to get money, to get everybody going off of one another instead of trying to come together. What I'd like to know is, what is your plan?
I'm trying to answer your question,
What is your plan
ma'am.
to keep school teachers in the state and to keep our schools, our public schools strong
Well,
and open?
Michelle, what I was trying to say here is that specifically with that bill, it was about accountability only with COVID-19 funds. Because what we had around the country, and this is why it matters, because taxpayer dollars, your taxpayer dollars are going to Washington DC, and we had a lot of school districts and states around the country that were taking billions of dollars in COVID-19 relief money and doing a disservice to kids by not even coming up with a plan to reopen in person. Iowa is very lucky. I count our lucky stars that my kids, mine are 9 and 10 right now, their teachers are saints for chugging through the Zooms and trying to figure out a distinct memory of my oldest son, Max, doing gym class on Zoom, doing high kicks to the Nutcracker song, right? I mean, I remember that. So just a moment,
Why did you put a mask on that said?
Let me get to the part of the answer, if that's all right. I'm happy to answer your question, yes. But specifically what we've had in Washington DC is, and it's been public knowledge that the teachers unions in Washington DC have coordinated with the Biden administration behind closed doors. So that's not where we should be focused. We should be focused on the policies that get our kids back in school. And that's why I introduced the Reopen Schools Act, because it was about following the science. We knew kids needed to be in school. It was safe for them to do that. That's why we were providing billions and billions of dollars to schools across the country in COVID relief money, so that they could use that to help make sure we were getting kids in school safely and providing an in-person option. So the provisions of that bill specifically were that they got part of the money right away. All schools did, regardless of what their plan was. But if they didn't present an actual plan to get kids back in school and do so safely, then they wouldn't get the rest of those COVID relief funds. That's specific to those COVID relief funds. And that's what we were trying to do, because we know this impact has been so great, not only on the teachers who were, as I'm mentioning, trying to innovate and get through all this. So thank you for what you did as a teacher. My mom was a teacher herself, so she taught at Newton High School. You've been through a lot, teachers have been through a lot, students have been through a lot, and parents have been through a lot. And I think we need to do a good job of balancing all of those concerns, because there are concerns on both sides, right? I mean, obviously, we want to make sure our kids are in school. We want to make sure that long-term mental health issues related to the pandemic our young people are experiencing at a higher rate. We know a lot of that damage was done because they weren't in school. And that's why I was so passionate about making sure that all kids in this country had that opportunity. It disadvantaged our rural kids the most to keep them out of school. It disadvantaged our poor kids the most to keep them out of school. And those are the kids who need to go to school. Maybe it's the only meal they're getting that day. And I think we saw that play out in Chicago, right? And that's where even the mayor came out and said our kids need to be in school. So that was my heart and my intention as a mom and a working parent and someone who respects the teachers who are educating my kids in a public school here in Iowa. I want to make sure that they are engaged in getting the best education they can possibly. And that's what I've heard from a number of other parents as well. As far as keeping people here in Iowa, and I know this is an issue that's obviously hitting our education industry, but it's hitting every industry right now. Everywhere I go, workforce is a huge issue. I just did a town hall meeting in Marshalltown with a number of different employers in Marshall County and the Greater Des Moines Partnership. Everybody is struggling with keeping people right now. And it has been so hard, and people are making changes in their lifestyle, and so I'm serving on the Jobs and Economy Task Force. We're working on policies that will help to rebuild our workforce, make us more competitive, not only as a state, and what the legislature does is separate from what we're doing obviously at the federal government, but nationally we have to be a competitive place to grow businesses and establish businesses and have a good life. Otherwise, we're going to continue to lose opportunities. So that's what we're focused on, to try to help with all of these areas of professions that we are struggling right now to get people to come to work and continue to slog on. Our healthcare industry obviously has been incredibly impacted by the pandemic, and those folks are burned out too. Those folks who have cared for patients and continue to care for patients. So this is obviously affecting a lot of different industries. And
do you have a plan, an education plan? Since you're putting things out on education, do you have a specific education plan?
Specifically, I think
to keep
to keep, I'm focused on all workers, specifically making life easier and better here in Iowa, economically, quality of life. I talk about the initiatives to specifically support our small businesses and lower taxes. That provides more opportunities for our communities. Again, these are all issues that affect all of us in our communities, and that's what I'm focused on, and happy to have a follow-up conversation specific to education with you, but I know we have a lot of questions here today. But yeah, and Cindy, yes. Nice to see you, thanks for driving up.
Yeah. Thanks for being here today, Representative Hinson. I would just like to follow up a bit on the education question. I think based on the comments that I just heard, that I think we all agree that teachers have played a very valuable role these last 2 years. You spoke about student mental health and the importance that kids be in school, and I think that is the goal for all of us. I guess it's mostly just a comment more than a question. I would just encourage everyone in a leadership position to use the power of their position to lift public schools and public school teachers up. There's a lot of teachers are feeling very bad right now. There's a lot going on in the state of Iowa, so I would just appreciate anything you can do, anything anyone in this room can do to say thank you to a public school teacher, because they have been literally in the trenches for 2 years. And we talk about kids' mental health, but teachers have mental health issues as well. So that's just my ask of you.
Thank you. And thank you for your service as well. I know you taught a long time and also serve on the school board, so thank
Right.
you for your service. And I agree with you. I think if I can't be more clear. I look at what job my kids' teachers have done in the last 2 years, and especially my youngest, he was struggling with reading and very frustrated. And I talk about mental health issues for all kids. It affected our family too. And I remember when he came home, he's in 3rd grade now, but so would have been coming out of 1st grade and learning he wasn't going back to his classroom, and how upset he was, and the big emotion that he felt, and I know the teachers were feeling it too. They did a parade, Linmar schools, where my boys go to school. They did, the teachers missed their kids, right? Because they couldn't see them every day, and I know that, and they did a honking parade, card parade through our neighborhood, and we went out with signs in the driveway and got a chance to say thank you to our teachers, obviously, who continued to plug on. So yeah, I think we can all do a better job of that and make sure we're speaking up to be with gratitude for the people who are educating our next generation in school. One more question, and then right over here. Aisle there. No, that's okay. We'll go.
As an Iowan and gathered here today, one of my broadest concerns that you can assist with is national security. And we're fighting it on a lot of fronts with this particular presidency. We have an open border. We have the Canadian trucker blockade up front, up north, which I wholly support. And then we are getting oil from other countries when we are contemplating going to war with that same country. How can we buy 36-gallon barrels of oil every day from a country when we have that oil and consider going to war with them? I'd like to.
It's a huge liability. And we're obviously very closely, thank you for that question. And I'll address the border very quickly in just a minute, but I first want to talk about the impending situation with Russia and Ukraine, because I think that's on many of our minds. We're all watching what's happening there right now. It's absolutely critical that we stand up to Russia, number one. We know many of our European allies rely on Russia for their energy, and Russia is a bad actor, and they continue to be a bad actor. The time for sanctions on Russia is now. It's not waiting until they take action and decrease the stability in the region. So we need to be very firm about that. I think we should have already probably done some sanctions to deter them. That's the best way in my mind. It's nonviolent diplomacy, but it definitely makes our message clear that we're standing with our European allies, and I think we have a duty to do that. As far as what's happening at the border, I agree, it's an absolute travesty. It's a problem that's not getting any better. I talked about some of the bills I've introduced to combat that. The Stop the Betrayal Act, the See the Crisis Act. We need our border SAR to go actually see what's happening at the border. I've been there. I've met with the Customs and Border Patrol agents. Morale in their agency is at an all-time low because they're being cut off at the knees and not able to do their job effectively to keep our country safe. We know that at least 4 people on the terror watch list were apprehended coming across. Those are just the people that we know of. And the gotaways, they can't fully document for. So we know we had 2 million encounters with illegal immigrants at the southern border last year, not to mention the dangerous fentanyl that poured across the border. I just was talking to a constituent on the way here on the phone. His son has had some challenges with drugs, and he's concerned about fentanyl. And fentanyl is the #1 cause of death right now in those 18 to 49. That's hugely concerning for us. Enough fentanyl has poured across the southern border to kill every American 7 times over. That's a startling statistic, and I think it's meaningful because this is a problem that the current administration has turned a blind eye to. I've been meeting with our local law enforcement throughout the district. They're flagging not only the fentanyl, but meth that's coming up. That's in addition to the human element that we're dealing with here. We've got human trafficking rampant at our southern border. I met with the Del Rio sector chief of the CBP. They told us the cartels are making about $11 million a week smuggling people. That should be hugely concerning to anyone about why we need to take action, why we need to control the border. We need to secure our border first and foremost. That means, in my mind, returning to policies that worked. The wall, making sure we're enforcing Remain in Mexico policy, making sure we're enforcing Title 42, which allows, it's a pandemic policy that the CBP has asked us to make permanent because it allows them to process single men coming across faster and return them to Mexico. They can do it in about an hour. But when you're dealing with 2 million, you can imagine the inflow that our Customs and Border Patrol agents are dealing with. Meanwhile, the cartels are recruiting people on TikTok to run drugs and drive for them. So we have an uphill battle there, but we need to be firm in our support for securing the border, firm in our support for those who keep our country and our communities safe, because if we don't have safety and security in our communities, I don't think we have anything. So thank you for that, and we'll continue to try to hold them accountable. I asked for Secretary Mayorkas's resignation because I think we have a huge void in leadership at Department of Homeland Security, one that is putting us all at risk. And I actually drove up here. There was a young girl who was attacked by an illegal immigrant in the community here in Blackhawk County. I met with her and her family, and I promised them that day that I would not stand by and let that happen to another family. It was absolutely heartbreaking to see what happened to them, the long-term impact of that crime in our community, and I think a lot of that could be deterred if we were solid with making sure we're securing our border. So thank you. I'll wrap with your question because I know I want to call on you, and then I do have to go because I know I've got 3 things lined up after this. So.
Yeah, I was just interested, you mentioned this bipartisan law that is for veterans with PTSD. Can you give some detail on that? Because I know someone that needs that help.
Yes, absolutely, and I think because we're tight on time, please follow my staff, but it's specifically for grant programs to go to rural providers as well as the VA. So the VA previously, I think, was ill-equipped to deal with crisis coming in its door. It's specifically about triaging mental health patients as they come in, as well as rural outreach. So we'll follow up with you specifically. Christina is in the back. We'll get you all the details. So thank you, everybody, for coming today. It's my pleasure to serve you in Congress, and please, I'd encourage you to subscribe to our newsletter if you haven't already. Hinson.house.gov is our website, and again, feel free to call our office if we can be of assistance to you. It's an honor to serve you in Washington, D.C., and thanks for coming out and letting me answer your questions today. Thank you very much.